headed towards the migrant reception centre, celebrating touching European soil.
In 2015, Europe was hit by the largest wave of mass migration since World War II. But one country stood out by saying no. Hungary, under the leadership of Viktor Orban, decided to take a hardline stance. While others scrambled to accommodate, Hungary built fences, changed its laws, and drew a line in the sand. For some, it was a bold defense of sovereignty, a plucky underdog holding his ground against the dictates of Brussels. For others, it was the consolidation of authoritarianism in a xenophobic country run by a quasi-dictator. But here's the thing, Hungary has not only stood strong and weathered everything that's been thrown at them, they've also changed the way Europe handles immigration to this day and inspired others across Europe to do the same. From border fences to economic strategies, from cultural identity to political fallout, Hungary's stance was clear. Mass immigration isn't the solution, it's the problem. So how did they do it? Let's dive in.
Migration is an issue which is a disintegrating factor. Why do we need it? So if you have a problem in Italy and in many countries that you decided to let many migrants come in, and now you have difficulties how to manage to live together with them, it's a serious problem.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has long positioned himself as one of Europe's most vocal critics of mass migration. During a speech at the Cernobbio Forum in northern Italy, he reiterated his stance, claiming that migration is not only a challenge for individual nations, but a fundamental threat to the cohesion of the European Union. According to Orban, the influx of migrants into Europe since 2014 has catalyzed a period of disintegration within the EU, undermining its legislative framework and social fabric. Orban's hardline position is no surprise to those familiar with his policies, and has rejected the idea that mass immigration is necessary or beneficial for Hungary. At the forum, he emphasized his priorities for Hungary's 6-month presidency of the EU, highlighting 3 key issues: competitiveness, the ongoing war in Europe, and migration. In contrast to more open asylum policies seen in countries like Germany, Orban made it clear, we never let them in. This stance is echoed by other senior Hungarian officials who have doubled down on Orban's anti-immigration policies.
This type of activity is not recognized by the European Union, but we are attacked for it. The EU does not compensate Hungary financially, but wants to force Hungary to abandon its border protection by giving us a hefty fine for something which is nothing more than compliance with laws of the European Union and Hungary.
State Secretary Bence Ritvari recently proposed a provocative plan to offer asylum seekers free one-way travel to Brussels, the EU's administrative center. In a news conference in Budapest, Ritvari expressed frustration with EU mandates on migration, stating that Hungary would willingly send any illegal migrants to Brussels, adding, if Brussels wants illegal migrants, Brussels can have them. While much of the rest of Europe, like France and Germany, have responded to their declining populations, but growing economies by importing people to fill gaps, Hungary just doesn't think this works for them. They believe the cultural drawbacks from mass immigration outweigh the economic benefits.
I'm sorry, I don't think European protocol requires the food to be thrown at the refugees.
No,
when there are children
no.
there, it could hit them on the head.
European protocol requires these people to come legally to a country. What we are trying to achieve to collect all of them as it is required by European law, because it is impossible to cross the borders illegally and go freely within the European Union.
According to Hungarian politician and historian Zoltán Kovács, Hungary's resistance to mass immigration isn't just about policy, it's about preserving a deeply rooted cultural and historical identity. He points out that Europeans, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, have been dealing with social conflicts within their Judeo-Christian traditions for over 1,000 years. Sure, those conflicts sometimes led to civil wars, but they were conflicts we had the tools to manage. Fast forward to today, and mass immigration introduces new challenges that we've never faced on this scale. And Kovács argues that these challenges can't be solved with the same playbook. Unlike countries like the UK, which has a long history of managing diverse populations due to its colonial past, Hungary doesn't have that kind of experience. Kovács says this is why Hungary, and many other nations in the region, have turned to alternative solutions. Rather than relying on mass immigration to fill labor gaps, Hungary has implemented a guest worker program while doubling down on pro-family policies to grow its domestic workforce. And it's working. Hungary's employment rates are up, and its fertility rate has risen by 23% over the last decade. Kovács dismisses the idea that mass immigration is the answer to Europe's problems, calling it a fairy tale that's simply not working in countries that embraced it. For Hungary, protecting sovereignty and cultural integrity takes priority, and they believe where there's a will, there's a way. So that's the why. What about the how? Well, Hungary has become well known for prioritizing border security and watching who's trying to enter the country. Border control efforts have popular support too, and they reached new heights with the announcement that 3,000 new border hunters would be recruited to reinforce the country's existing forces. These new recruits will join up to 10,000 police officers and soldiers who already patrol the razor wire fence along Hungary's southern border with Serbia, designed to prevent migrants from entering the country. Equipped with pistols, pepper spray, batons, and other protective gear, the border hunters will undergo 6 months of training before being deployed. The recruits, who must pass both physical and psychological tests, will receive a salary of 150,000 forint, roughly £406 or $542, during their first 2 months, rising to 220,300 forint as they continue their service. Unlike Donald Trump's border wall, Hungary puts its money where its mouth is and erected a razor wire fence which stretches 175 kilometers, 110 miles, along the border. While this barrier has become a symbol of Hungary's hardline immigration policies, it has also drawn sharp criticism from international organizations like the United Nations, particularly regarding the country's pushbacks of migrants at the border. Even at the height of the migrant crisis, only 30 migrants per day were allowed to enter Hungary through official transit zones, proving how effectively they managed to seal their frontiers. The battle between Hungary and the European Union over migration policy has also escalated dramatically, with Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán, vowing retaliation against a €200 million fine imposed by the European Court of Justice. The fine, issued for Hungary's violation of EU asylum rules, has sparked outrage in Budapest, where the government has openly defied the ruling and threatened to transport irregular migrants directly to Brussels. This move is seen as Hungary's counterattack against the EU's enforcement of the fine. Orbán's government has declared it unacceptable that Hungary should be penalized for its stringent migration policies, which they argue have protected Europe's borders. The proposed one-way ticket plan to send migrants to the heart of the EU is a symbolic gesture, underscoring Orbán's broader discontent with Brussels' handling of migration and asylum policies. The European Commission, however, is not taking this lightly. A Commission spokesperson condemned Hungary's plan as a breach of EU law, particularly the Schengen Borders Code, which governs the free movement of people across Europe. If Hungary continues its threat, it would violate EU law and undermine the mutual trust that sustains the Schengen area. Such an action could even temporarily restrict Hungary's participation in the Schengen zone, potentially disrupting one of the EU's most valued achievements, borderless travel. Belgium, the likely destination for Hungary's migrant buses, has been especially vocal in rejecting the Hungarian government's actions, calling it a provocation and demanding a strong response from the Commission. Nicole Demore, Belgium's State Secretary for Asylum and Migration, has stated that her country will not accept migrants who are used as political tools, making it clear that Hungary's plan would not be tolerated. The current standoff is part of a broader and long-standing feud between Orbán's government and the EU, particularly on the issues of migration, rule of law, and democratic standards. Hungary's refusal to comply with EU asylum laws has been a flashpoint for years, culminating in the ECJ ruling that the country had committed a serious breach of EU law. Orbán, however, has dismissed the ruling as outrageous and unacceptable, accusing EU bureaucrats of caring more about migrants than their own citizens. This is not the only contentious issue on Hungary's plate. The country has also demanded €2 billion in compensation from the EU, which it claims to have spent on border protection since 2015. The EU, however, has rejected Hungary's claims, refusing to reimburse the funds. Moreover, Hungary's recent decision to extend its national card scheme to Russian and Belarusian citizens has raised concerns within the EU about potential security risks to the Schengen area, further straining relations. With tensions rising, This standoff between Hungary and the EU could have serious ripple effects. As the European Commission scrambles to get Hungary to play by the EU's rules, Viktor Orban isn't backing down. He's positioning himself as the ultimate defender of national sovereignty, standing up to what he sees as Brussels' constant overreach. At the heart of it all, migration. This issue could drive Hungary and the EU into even deeper political and legal clashes in the coming months. The big question is, will Hungary's defiance reshape the future of Europe? In 2023, Hungary faced more criticism than ever, with claims that Viktor Orban's government is getting increasingly heavy-handed. From cracking down on teachers and restricting free speech, to even slapping fines on bookshops for breaking the country's so-called propaganda law, Orban's approach to governance hit a new level of controversy. His government isn't just making headlines, it's sparking outrage across Europe. But is this Orban tightening his grip on power, or just his way of standing firm against the pressures of the EU? According to Amnesty International, it's the former. They believe that Hungary's government has taken drastic measures to restrict rights and silence dissent. For example, they passed a law dubbed the Vengeance Act, which Amnesty claims is designed to limit teachers' rights and suppress their ability to protest. When teachers and students took to the streets demanding reform, they were met with tear gas, arrests, and detentions, with even minors caught in the crackdown. Amnesty says this is part of a larger strategy to centralize control over education and silence critics. But it doesn't stop there. Amnesty International also reports that Hungary's government has expanded its control into the cultural sphere through the propaganda law. This law, they say, imposes fines on bookshops for displaying LGBTQ+ literature in youth sections without special packaging. Authorities have also banned a Pride TV ad, and there's been an uptick in vandalism targeting LGBTQ+ symbols, with transgender rights facing further restrictions. Despite backlash from the EU and human rights groups, Orban's government shows no signs of backing down. So, where does this leave Hungary? 2023 painted a clear picture. Hungary is digging in its heels, and the road ahead looks bumpy for both its citizens and its relationship with Europe. Hungary's hardline stance on migration, led by Viktor Orban, hasn't just reshaped its own national policies, it's inspired a growing movement across Europe. Orban's Fidesz party has become a model for far-right and nationalist parties who share his vision of a more sovereign, less integrated Europe. Groups like the Alternative for Germany, AfD, and France's National Rally are rallying around similar platforms, forming alliances across the European Parliament to push back against what they see as the EU's overreach on issues like immigration, national identity, and border control. Hungary's influence on the far-right political landscape across Europe is undeniable, and it's not just confined to its own borders anymore. The creation of the Europe of Sovereign Nations, ESN group in the European Parliament, is a prime example of how Hungary's nationalist policies, spearheaded by Viktor Orban, have inspired a broader movement. ESN brings together far-right parties from across Europe, all united by their opposition to mass migration, the EU's Green Deal, and social progressivism. These parties share a vision of sovereignty, pushing back against what they see as the overreach of Brussels and advocating for a Europe made up of strong, independent nation-states. But here's the bigger question. Will this new alliance reshape the political balance in Europe? And how much of Hungary's defiant spirit will continue to ripple across the continent? The formation of the ESN is just one of many signs that the far-right movement, heavily inspired by Hungary, is gaining strength, and it could challenge the very foundation of the European Union.